and the world it fashioned were so vast, so inscrutable, that it seemed incomprehensible to even the wisest man that anything could really distort this basic relationship. There was nothing that could cause creation as a whole to be untrue to or dissimilar to the Creator. Men might interfere in little things, but they could not interfere in the rising of the sun or the motion of the stars or the formation of elements or the growth of plants or the breeding of animals. These things were universal, and they had to some way bear witness to the universal purpose. To behold creation, therefore, was to behold the miniature reflection of the Creator. Those laws which exist in nature must be acceptable to the Creator, or they could not exist. Consequently, if we cannot know those laws which are spoken by the very mouth of Sophia, the embodiment of wisdom, we at least have the right and power to observe these laws operating around us. And in so doing, we should have the faith, and we should have the reason for that faith, by which we can say the laws of nature are also the laws of God. All visible processes are invisible processes made visible. And God is made visible in creation. Not in full and complete majesty, not in the greatest panoply of power, but certainly in a reasonable way, so that man does not just have to follow the revelations of other men. He doesn't have to depend entirely upon the authority of the elders. He does not need to build his entire code upon the so-called wisdom of the past. He has a living wisdom available to him. He has this wisdom which is the wonder and working of the world. So here we have the idea of the great face and its reflection. We have now the possibility of man exploring God through examining the universe. And not only this possibility, but to the Kabbalist and most other mystics, the valid right to do this, even though it might upset some of the best laid schemes of theological institutions. Furthermore, in this analogy between God and nature, there arose another mystery which seemed equally valid and equally important, and that was the mystery of the macrocosm and the microcosm. Now, the macrocosm was the great world with all its machinery, and the microcosm was the little world fashioned in the image of this greater world. And whether it was arrogance or insight, we may never know. But our ancestors came to the conclusion that the most complete working instrument by which the universal will can be made known is man himself. Man is the microcosm. Man is the little creature on biblical authority fashioned in the image of his God. For it is said that God made man in his own image. Male and female created he them. Now, if man was made in the image of God, and certainly the Kabbalah is based upon the Pentateuch, the Talmud, and the Mishnah, then it follows that by this same divine authority, by this same divine wisdom revealed by Moses and the prophets, man is in the likeness of his Creator. Thus, to see man, in a sense, is to see the Creator. Perhaps not just man as a physical organism, but to become aware of the wonder of man, to be able to examine the various garments of man, to examine from the outer part to the inner part of man, is therefore to become aware of the law, of the divine purpose, and of the eternal wisdom. Even Maimonides, who was by no means a Kabbalist, in fact was one of the greatest of the early Jewish scholars who feared the Kabbalah, even Maimonides admitted that the nature of man himself was like the nature of the law, of which the outer and visible part, the Torah, corresponds to the body. In the invisible inner part, the Mishnah corresponds to the soul, and the deepest and greatest spiritual mysteries of religion correspond to the spirit in man. Therefore, man, to a measure, is not only an embodiment of nature, but he is embodiment of the Scriptures, of the sacred writings, and all of the mysterious laws by which the universe is maintained. This was not entirely original, however, with the Jewish scholars. It already had been established in India by Hinduism. For the Vedic writings and the Puranas, the great literatures of India, both of them build strongly in their cosmological sections by paralleling creative processes with the creative processes of man. Thus, to their thinking, the universe was generated as man is generated. The universe has its prenatal epoch as man does. The universe lives and grows like a man. It becomes aged, feeble, and ceases like a man. The universe, then, is patterned from a contemplation of the processes taking place in the biology and physiology of human life. This gave the Kabbalah a working foundation, namely that through the exploration of man, the study of all of his parts and members, man might come gradually to understand the universal principle for which he stands. Through the understanding of nature, man can understand the universal plan of which nature is an expression. And also through the contemplation of the sacred writings, the books, the Scriptures of the world, which are also microcosms of this knowledge in another way, man can come to understand the Creator as this Creator as manifested in the mystical experiences of human beings. Altogether, then, the Kabbalah now provided a key, and the ancient rabbins of this school declared that the key can be turned 7 times in the lock, and in its 7 turnings gives man the 7 different series of analogies which can be set up, by means of which it is possible to explore the Creator through his creation. Now, why should man want to know all this about the Creator? What was this strange hunger in man who wanted to know God? The mystic says it is perfectly natural that man should want to know his own source, that being a living thing and continually experiencing life, he should have a reasonable and natural desire to understand this life which he experiences. In searching for his Creator, therefore, he is only following the ancient admonition, man, know thyself. And it dawned gradually upon his consciousness that he could never know himself without knowing his God. Another reason why this knowledge of the Creator, or of the plan of the Creator, was so important, was because man had already experienced the fallibility of human opinions on these subjects. Very wise persons disagreed constantly. There were many faiths, many gods, many shrines, many creeds and sects, many schools and beliefs. And then, and even more now, man was confused by this complex of inconsistencies. It became gradually obvious to him that his own discrimination, that his own insight was not adequate. If when presented with 5 great, well-honored beliefs, he did not know with certainty which one to choose. He did not know how to weigh the arguments of one venerated teacher against the arguments of another who had arrived at a different conclusion. He therefore, as an individual, came to realize that there had to be some other way of knowing. There had to be a direct knowing. If there was not, there could be no end of uncertainty. It was also obvious that in this form of direct knowing, there was not a great deal of available information. No one seemed to know how to achieve it. If men had had it, if men had practiced it in the past, they would have come to agreement, but they did not. Consequently, it must be assumed that the average person, though he might be learned and considered wise by his associates, did not necessarily possess this insight, was not necessarily in a position to solve beyond debate or dispute any of the essential problems of life. The more man went on with this, and his experiencing of it, the more he also came to another Kabbalistic conclusion that we face today. Whenever we get a grand panacea for something, when someone makes a pronouncement that is so universal that it seems to be impossible to contradict it, and we try to apply this, we suddenly discover that it is not applicable to everybody. We come to the realization that a doctrine which satisfies one will not satisfy another. And if we accomplish a great reform in the world, we find some people are pleased by it and some are not. There is no concept of heaven, for example, that man can devise that will be attractive to everyone who hopes to get there. And that which might be to us a blessed state would be to someone else a cursed condition. There is no uniformity, apparently, of the immediate need of man. His needs are so infinitely diversified. What he seems to need always is a certain comprehension beyond what he has. But when his neighbor tells him the answer to something, it is not this man's answer. It works for the neighbor, but it does not work for him. An answer given by a learned person is satisfactory to 10 and unsatisfactory to another 10. Consequently, there is a kind of individualism in human existence. Men are not all cast in exactly the same way. They cannot be held together by one common rule, at least none has yet been found that could hold them. They may even agree, for the most part, on the benevolence of certain concepts or ideas, but then they do not live them. There seems to be something by which the universal solution is not possible, that we cannot be all fed with the same food. We cannot always rejoice in the same experiences, although they may appear to be universally good. The only answer to this type of problem, to the Kabbalist, was that there must be some way in which each individual could tune into his own need, that whatever was next for that person must in some way be available to him. Finally, he is the only one who knows his need. He is the only one who can tell when it is truly satisfied. He is the only one who is able to engineer and implement his own next step forward. Thus, whatever this instruction is, it must be highly individual. It has to be almost as infinitely individual as individuality itself. There's only one possible answer to this mystery, namely that what man needs must be immediately available in himself. That his search for solution must always be in terms of himself, in terms of reaching into some root within his own nature, by which he will learn that which is next in the divine plan for the unfoldment of himself as he is, not as he would like to be, not as he wishes he was, not as he sometimes may think himself to be, but what he actually is, an estimate which he may not be able to arrive at even by his own best judgment. All this, then, does finally bear heavily upon that point in which the Kabbalah most closely came into conformity with the Gnosis, or the doctrine of the Gnostics. And that is this problem of emanation. Emanation is the only way in which the Gnostics, the Manichaeans, and several other early sects, including the Persians. The only way in which they could reconcile two opposites. It would seem that these opposites must emanate or cause to radiate from themselves conditions of themselves, and that these conditions could meet even if the essential natures themselves were too far separated. For example, from the sun comes constantly a radiance of light. And while the sun itself would probably be infinitely too splendid for man to approach and survive, yet this light from the sun is its emanation. And wherever this emanation goes, certain qualities of the sun go with it. And this emanation may extend countless light years into space, touching one planet in its orbit, as in the case of the Earth, and touching another, as in the case of Saturn. Now, the light of the sun on Saturn will be less than it is on Earth because it is further from the sun. But that light, in its own way, must sustain the life upon Saturn, or make it possible for this planet to be likewise fruitful. Consequently, by emanation, that which is further removed has a different destiny by this circumstance alone. That which receives this solar intensity less brilliantly must adjust to a different kind of life. This life may be just as good for all that we know, but it has to be different, because the proximity of the body itself to the source of light determines some of its qualities, determines to a certain degree its nature and substance. In the same way, the proximity of man to the source of his light, which is truth, has a great deal to do with his character. We find in the Kabbalah, then, this same concept that is everywhere present from the study of emanation, namely, that you have no principle in nature of either good or evil. You have only a principle of light and the absence of light, or the diminution of light. So we have the old philosophic definition that evil is not a thing in itself, but the least degree of good. It is a degree of good less than that which is present in some other creature. Therefore, we say that this lesser creature is bad in reference to this other creature, which is better. In nature, therefore, there is reality and its gradual diminution through emanation, until somewhere reality seemingly dies in illusion. But this illusion is not a principle. It is merely that which lies too far from the center of the light of truth. Ignorance is not a principle, but it is that condition in which the mind is far removed from the source of wisdom. That the mind may approach wisdom and, coming nearer, receive more of it, even if a planet moving toward the sun will become warmer or more brilliant as the result. So in emanations, we have a universe in which two extremes are brought together by a series of conditions. And in this, the Kabbalah goes into astronomy. And in the ancient system of astronomy, you had a group of three essential factors. You had the highest factor, which was the zodiac. Then you had the orbits of the 7 planets, and then you had the Earth with its 4 elements. The Kabbalah would liken deity to the zodiac as creator. It would liken the Earth to the planet Earth, which in the old system was placed in the middle of the circles. This would be nature. Between these two were the orbits of the 7 spirits, or the Elohim, that move upon the face of the deep. And forth from each end, in the middle of the 7 planets, was the sun in their system, with the 3 planets, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, above it, and the 3 lesser lights of the old system Venus, Mercury, and the moon below, in the form of a ladder extending from the earth to the sky, the ladder of 7 rungs, the ladder upon which Jacob saw angels ascending and descending. This placed the sun itself in the midst of the whole system. This was the Pythagorean theory of music, for it was by placing the fret on the string in the relation of the sun in the midst of the string, in the middle part, that produced the interval of the octave. To the 7 planetary orbits, then to the band of the zodiac, and then to the little door in the sky described by St. John in the Apocalypse, beyond which was the Shamayim, or the vast, mysterious crystal sea of the divine nature. This was the way they set up the universe, according to their knowledge, and it has become our Ptolemaic system, which was to remain comparatively unchallenged, except by a few scholars, until the rise of the Copernican theory. Now, the earth began to produce creatures according to its kind. And these creatures then began to represent an ascending order of life. The life which was locked in the earth in the process of descending through emanation began to rise again through emanation. And the Kabbalists believed that this ascending from the earth resulted in the kingdoms reaching upward from the earth toward their source, so that you might say there descended a great light or vitality from circumference of a great sphere to its center. In the center it formed the great eye, the eye of Ketha, the eye which is the eye of Israel, or the eye of the God of Israel, which neither slumbers nor sleeps, the great open eye that has no lid. This was locked in the midst of the lowest level of the emanation, which is the earth itself, as a seed. And the seed then turns and begins to grow. And the seed then begins to emanate back through the great septenary system to the source in which it came. Spencer calls the descent of this light into the earth, or this life into the earth, involution. And the ascent of it out of the earth and back again into its full space consciousness, evolution. And the seed coming forth from the ground is the mysterious verbum, or the Word made flesh, which we read about. For this is the parable, says Jesus. The seed is the Word of God. The Word of God was the creating power. Now, as this begins to grow and unfold, from the earth come the elements. Come water, fire, and air. And from the kingdoms of nature, from the earth, which is the mineral, comes the plant, the animal, and the human. And if we assign these to these steps going upward, we find then that the earth represents the earth. The water becomes symbolic of the moon. The element of fire becomes symbolical of Mercury. Of air becomes symbolical of Venus. And so up this entire ladder, but those are the only 4 elements that we have. So Paracelsus gives us the 5th or magical element, the element of the elixir of life, Azoth, which corresponds to the 4th orbit of the sun. In the case of the various creatures coming out, earth represents the mineral, water or the moon represents the vegetable, the Mercury represents the animal kingdom, Venus represents the human kingdom, and then we have this other thing, this man who is not of the earth, but of enlightenment. And man himself divides into 2 definite orders of life, the earth man and the sky man. And man as a creature growing up in the prehistoric world, the man of the Neanderthal man, or the Piltdown man, or any one of these types, finally gives place to the man of wisdom and the man of light. And the true humanity of man is born when man is ensouled and becomes a living thing. And this carries him to the ring of the sun. And the enlightened man, therefore, stands in the middle distance between heaven and earth. And this same relationship is used in another analogy, where heaven becomes spirit, earth becomes matter, and man becomes soul. And in this system, the orbit of the sun is the orbit of the world soul. So we have deity descending from spirit through soul into body. We have man ascending from body through soul to spirit. And as these two great processes slowly merge and mingle, we have the great Gnostic system of emanations, in which divine life flowing downward meets the growth of itself out of the earth through creation, so that creation grows up toward the Creator, even while the Creator is flowing downward into the creation. These are finally mingled in the Chinese Yang-Yin symbol, or the flowing half circles, to result ultimately in the re-identification and absolute unity and unification of creature and creator, so that finally both become again the indescribable unit, the one that can never be broken or lost. And of course, yoga in India is simply a name for this motion upward to union with cause. So the emanation theory is man emanating more and more spiritual overtones until he is brought again into harmony with the divine life, which is his true substance and nature. This is the way both the Gnostics and the Kabbalists attempted to explain the bridge, or the bridging across of the two extremes of spirit and matter. We have to use the same thing even when we think of man as spirit and matter. When we think of man as a spiritual entity, we must regard him as a space being. We have no way of knowing what he is, what he looks like, what he is going to do. He is locked in the inscrutability of his own absolute abstraction. But man, by the process of involution or descent, gradually clothes this inscrutability with an increasingly tangible vestment, until finally at birth he stands embodied, which means that his life principle has gradually built around him various psychic fields, has communicated these psychic and rational fields with his outer body by nerves, by arteries, by veins, by endocrine units, and all this type of connective tissue, so that finally that which is within man as more than body is finally able to express itself outwardly in the material world. This is where the Kabbalah uses the analogy of the microcosm to express the creative processes of God. Now, man, having been born, is then, we might say, like the seed of God buried in the earth. The seed of his consciousness is buried within him. Gradually he must gain control of this body. Gradually, through growth, he must find the unfoldment of the life within himself. Through education, through culture, through civilization, we finally discover that he comes into some type, not adequate, but some type of maturity. And in this maturity, he reaches the point of self-direction. He reaches the point of self-determinism. We say that he is adult. We say that he is now ready to take on the living of his own life. He has become an individual. And individuality is one of the keys of the sun symbolism. For in ancient astrology, the sun was the symbol of individuality. So it means that man has reached upward on this ladder now until he has united himself with the sun, which is in the dead center of the ladder. 3.5 rungs from the bottom, 3.5 rungs from the top. Thus, in the attaining of this, man reaches, theoretically, into the state of soul existence. man has become, by evolution, a living soul. By this is further implied that in the process of evolution, man has released soul power, that he is gradually growing into a psychic entity rather than into a physical entity. It is interesting, therefore, perhaps, that within the last 50 years, man has begun to labor with the problem of soul identity. He is more and more interested in what his soul is. He is no longer willing to think of this soul merely as a theological abstraction. He is beginning to say, what do we mean by soul? And out of this subject he has evolved the subject of psychology. And psychology, while it is now largely concerned with mental phenomena, was originally, in its classical meaning, the science of the soul. And even today, considering mental phenomena, it could well be stretched to mean that it is the science of the person living in the body. It is the science of this being that is suspended halfway between heaven and earth, bound to the earth by the body, bound to heaven by instincts, impulses, ideals, convictions, aspirations within itself. So it has always been assumed that the human race, in its highest aspect, was the embodiment of soul. That therefore soul became, so to say, a heavenly kingdom beneath heaven. And in the learned discourses and dissertations of the elders in the Sefer HaZohar, the human soul is represented as one of the temples of Jerusalem. Here, for example, we have the concept of three temples. The Muslim and the Hindu have the same idea, namely that on the earth, on the rock of Moriah, on the threshing floor of the Jebusites, stands Solomon's temple, or stood Solomon's temple in the ancient days. This was the earthly temple. In the heavenly world itself was another temple, which was the living habitation of deity, and it was suspended above the earth over the site of Solomon's temple, such is discussed in the Zohar. But this is the temple in heaven, of which the earthly temple is a worldly shadow. Then there is a third temple, which is the temple of man's own soul, and this is suspended between the other two, making the triad. Thus, beneath the temple of spirit, suspended in the midst of the system, is the temple of the soul, found in Christianity in the account of the transfiguration of Jesus. And beneath that, on the rock Moriah, is the physical symbol of the congregation of Israel. So these three temples represent the three great places or stations of worship. They represent the temple of nature. They represent the temple of man, and they represent the vast temple of heaven itself. And also we have the concept that the whole creation itself is a sanctuary. That this sanctuary is again reproduced in man, where the heart is the matchless altar of his soul. And in nature also, in external or exoteric worship, the temple becomes the symbol of the congregation of the faithful. It is the ecclesia of the early church. It is the temple that is not made of stone, but made up of the body of the congregation, which uniting produces a certain spiritual mystery, which is again discussed in the Zohar. But for our purpose of emanations, then, we have the concept of two irreconcilable opposites, so to say, not reconciled by coming together, but each one by giving something.